For this video, I'm focusing on writing summaries and making comparisons, which is sometimes also known as synthesis. To synthesize information effectively means to look at two things at once and make a comparison by referring to both bits of evidence. This is for GCSE English Language and more specifically for AQA's Paper 2 Question 2, which is the 8-marker where you've got to spend about 10 minutes or so comparing two extracts together based on the task that you get. So this is the focus of this video. In this video, we're going to be looking at how two prisons are presented and also the experiences that are had in each of those prisons. So because this is a comparison question, tables like this are quite useful because it reminds us that we have to refer to two things at once. We've got source A and source B, and the two questions that we have to satisfy for this question, one of which is what is the evidence that we could use that helps us understand each prison, and based on that evidence, what does that evidence suggest about the prison? And of course, the answer to that red question is the inference. This is about interpreting the evidence that we put in our answers. And the more that we can interpret the evidence, the more inference we can state, the higher the mark that we will get. So let's look at source A. Source A was written by a woman called Vicky Price, and it's about her experiences in Holloway Prison. So I'm going to read through this, and you can see in red the quotes that I've already highlighted. So she says that many people think that prison must be a terrifying place with lots of violent women locked behind bars. It isn't. My arrival at Holloway was smooth, humane, and expertly carried out, involving quick fingerprinting and the metal detector. There was no strip search, but there are rules. I had brought in too many clothes. I was allowed to keep just 12 tops, shirts, t-shirts and jumpers, and 6 bottoms, trousers, tracksuit bottoms and pyjamas. No toiletries were allowed, but I was given an emergency bag, which was a prison issue, and I bought a welcome bag for $2.99, which would be subtracted from the cash I brought in with me. It contained a bottle of orange squash, biscuits, a bar of milk chocolate, deodorant, toothbrush and toothpaste, a comb, and some tea bags and sugar. I had the choice of that or a smoker's bag, but I could take in my books, as well as my writing pads, and a couple of pens. Welcome group and prison guards helped me and some other new inmates move our personal belongings, which had been transferred into transparent prison plastic bags, to landing A3, the reception landing, which ended up being my home for the next few days. The lovely girl who had secured the food for me told me on the way that she had 2 more years to do, but enjoyed doing the reception work because it kept her out of her cell until quite late in the evening. That night was bitterly cold, and I soon realised that the windows in Holloway cells do little to keep the chill out. At first, I was shown a cell with no curtains, and my helpers tried to fasten an orange blanket onto the railings without much success. Fortunately, there was another single cell available with curtains, this time near the guard's office, but the TV was not working, so there was another quick changeover. Then it was obvious that one thin orange blanket on the bed was not enough. Soon the girls were at my cell door with extra blankets, even though that was not normally allowed. Within a few minutes, I ended up with 5 and had to turn down the offer of a 6th. And then extra fruit and sandwiches that the girls must have had in their own cells started arriving. I couldn't believe the kindness of them all. So that's source A. We need to compare source A and what she says here to what we're told about the prison in source B. And this is from the Victorian 19th century extract, which tends to be source B for AQA anyway. We don't have the name of the writer here, though. Strong and stony, and this is Newgate Jail, by the way. Strong and stony, as the prison seems to passers by, it looks much stonier and stronger to the men who enter it. The multiplicity of heavy walls, of iron gates and doorways, of huge locks, of bolts, spikes and bars, of every imaginable shape and size, make the place a very nightmare dungeon. I followed the gruff underwarden through some dark and chilly vaulted passages, now turning to the right, now to the left. I was led into another chamber, on one side of which was a huge boiler with a furnace glowing under it, and on another side a large stone bath. On the third wall there was a couple of round towels on a roller, with a wooden bench beneath them. "Stop!" cried the warden. "Take your clothes off." I hesitated. "Take off your clothes, do you hear?" My clothes were soon laid on the bench, and a hot bath filled, and I went in. The officer then had his opportunity of taking up my garments one by one, searching their pockets and their linings, feeling them about and holding them against the light. My boots appeared to be especially suspicious. After he had put his hands into them, he thumped them violently on the stone floor. Having bathed, I was led down another passage, at the end of which were two gratings of iron bars, closely woven over with wirework, distant about 2 feet from each other. Unlocking both, he pushed me through, and started me up 2 or 3 steps into a square courtyard, where there was a man walking to and fro very violently. After shouting "One in," he locked the 2 gratings, and retreated rapidly in the direction of his dinner. Another warden, with a bunch of keys, came from a gloomy building that formed one side of the court. "Where from?" the jailer asked me, "and what are you here for?" Being replied to on these points, he said shortly, "Come this way." He led up the dark stone staircase to a corridor with cells on one side, having iron doors to them, a foot or more in thickness. One of these cells was to be mine. The cell was about 8 feet by 4, lighted by a loophole above eye level. It contained, besides an iron bedstead with a straw mattress and 2 coarse rugs upon it, an uncomfortable stool and a slanting reading desk fastened to the wall, on which were a Bible, a prayer book, and a hymn book. Alone for the first time since my apprehension, I stretched myself upon the bed, and, with my hands over my eyes, endeavoured to collect my thoughts. So that's source B. So hopefully from me reading those 2 extracts, you can see that we have very different experiences and very different prisons being described to us. And it's the prisons that we are comparing in our summary. Okay, so let's look at the question again then, and let's fill our table in now with some evidence. So the question is asking us to write a summary of the differences between the prisons and the experiences that can be had in each. So for each side of our table, we have now got some quotes, and those quotes are what I highlighted in red on the extracts. So I have an intention to use these quotes in my answer, but I might not be able to use all of them in the time. But it's my intention to use them. Okay, so I've got here mostly short quotes because short quotes work best. Remember, you shouldn't be spending large amounts of time copying out large quotes because it wastes time. So now that we've got our evidence, we've got our quotations, we now need to think about what the evidence here suggests about the prison. What do we work out for ourselves? What interpretations do we have based on this kind of evidence? So in order to prompt with this, we have these ideas. So think about whether the prisoners are treated as human beings or as a burden to society. Think about the amount of rules and how prison, or whether prison allows them to carry on with their hobbies and interests or not. Think about the focus that is placed on rehabilitation versus punishment. For example, prisons 200 years ago perhaps were slightly different, if not a lot different, to how they are now in terms of their role. Victorians liked punishment. As time has moved on, we've moved towards more a rehabilitation approach. Think about how the prisons did or did not protect the inmates' dignity and privacy. Whether each prison is presented as dystopian or not. That's quite a useful word sometimes with English, dystopian, meaning a place that's horrible or like a nightmare. Think of the conditions of the prisons, and finally think about the relationship between the prisoners and between prisoners and their prison staff, because that can also be a source of comparison as well. So these pointers here might prompt you to think of the inference based on the evidence that we saw previously. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off this video by showing you 2 examples. One answer is more effective than the other, to show you how you bring this all together and write your summary. In this first example, we can see the blue is the inference. So it's the bit that the student has written themselves based on their own inference. And as you can see, there isn't a lot of it in this answer, and it's also quite a short answer. So this wouldn't be a successful answer if you wanted to get the grade 4 or above. This would probably get you 1 or 2 marks out of 8, so the lower level of the mark scheme. But what they've done is they have compared, and they have used quotes, and there is a little bit of inference in there, but it's not very developed. For example, for that second half of the answer, where they talked about there's no strip search, but there was one in the second prison, they haven't then interpreted, well, what does that mean then? Why isn't there a strip search in the first prison? Why is the one in the second? What does that suggest about how the prisoners are treated in these prisons? So what lets this down is not the comparison, it's not the quoting, it's the level of confident inference that's the issue. So compare that answer to this one. Obviously you can see that it's longer, and we've got a lot more blue here, a lot more inference that the student has made. When comparing the prisons together, many differences occur. In source A, the process of entering the prison was smooth, humane, and expertly carried out, and there was no strip search, suggesting that the prison makes sure that the dignity and privacy of the inmates is protected, and they are treated like human beings and not animals just because they may have been convicted. Prisoners were also allowed to take in books and writing pads, suggesting that the prison is allowing the prisoners to do things they enjoy to pass the time, such as writing and reading. They were given some freedom. Okay, so that's source A. And then we have the connective, because that's the point of comparison. However, in source B, the only literature that prisoners have access to was the Bible, prayer book, and hymn book, suggesting inmates were expected to read religious text to help them see the error of their ways and teach them about good behaviour and respecting your fellow man. The fact that there were mattresses made of straw and huge locks, bolts, spikes, and bars implies that prison is less comfortable and welcoming, with a stronger emphasis placed on punishment and making it as unpleasant as possible, which is why the writer compares the prison to a nightmare dungeon. Animals sleep on straw, so these prisoners are being dehumanized because they have been imprisoned. So here you can see that the answer is more developed. They have quoted confidently, and they have also made sure that they give a lot of inference, suggesting that they've understood what the writer is telling them, and they've gone away and interpreted things for themselves. As you might have heard in previous videos that I've done about this question, the words suggesting, suggests, implies, or infers are really good prompts for you to give your inference, because it suggests that you are going away and you're interpreting information for yourself. Remember that the extracts will only tell you so much, and a lot of the meaning that we get from texts comes from our own brain and our own minds, and filling in a lot of the blanks for ourselves, which is what essentially inference is. Okay, so again, this would probably get you, well, it would get you the grade 4. It would probably get you perhaps 6 out of 8, perhaps into 7. So roughly, a much stronger pass mark. Okay, so that's a summary of what to do with paper 2, question 2, when you are writing summaries. Make sure you've got your quotes, and make sure, more importantly than that, you're talking about both texts and you're trying to elaborate with as much detail as possible in terms of your inference. What does that evidence tell you about what is being described? Thank you.